Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we're going to be going over the impact of the new Mega Evolution expansion on the currently best decks in the game. So we're not really going to be discussing all the brand new shiny Pokemon here, outside of cards that could be included in what we already know are our top meta contenders. So it's really going to be looking at how engines change and adapt, and how the current decks, in terms of strategy, how they're going to have to adjust and adapt to, first of all, Megas coming into the format, really making a huge shake-up, but also the other engine cards that we get in the game to see how they can take advantage of them or how are adversely affected by these cards as well. So let's take a look at the top contenders in the Black Bolt and White Flare expansion. We only have the World Championships really to go off of outside of like local events, but these are the decks that on the whole did the best at the World Championships, with Gholdengo being very popular in the field, but also having great conversion and generally having high placements. Dragapult, Dustoir obviously made the finals in Masters, but also a handful of players getting those high top 16, top 32 placements. Raging Bolt in the mix as well. Gardevoir, Grimmsnarl, Charizard, Flareon, Dragapult, Joltik Box, and Zoroark are our top 10. But also some of the top 20 decks that you can see on the right-hand side. I'm going to be discussing ones which I think are interesting to talk about or have big changes in there as well. So I'm not talking about all 20 today, just because the video would get way too long and bloated. And some of these I don't have much to say on them really, outside of like wait and see to see how the meta adapts. But for the most part, I think I'm going to be discussing the biggest changes and movers within our sort of top decks that we have in the format. Starting off with the Gholdengo. So we're going to see potential inclusions and threats on the left-hand side, but also my general overview of what I think Gholdengo is going to be doing and having to change and whatnot, and what potential avenues it has on the right-hand side of your screen. So the general overview for Dengo is that generally, being a one-hit KO machine is very good when now you can get 3 prize cards worth of Pokemon in just one attack, which is something obviously it can't do at the moment unless it's getting heads flips on like Togekiss or Chansey, redeemable ticket, shenanigans, or whatever else. So when you come up against Megas, it means that Gholdengo can take a single prize and it affects their map in that they can still win in 2 attacks after that KO. And we know that Gholdengo has that reach with admittedly double superior, which is a lot of resources to accumulate, but the fact that Dengo can take that big 3 prize knockout is a big selling point for this deck and the other one-hit KO decks that we have in the format, mostly Raging Bolt I'm thinking about. These two naturally just have a draw to them in the game in that they have that reach and will immediately punish any deck that gets too heavily involved in Mega Evolution, simply by having a great rate of race in this matchup. So Gholdengo doesn't really have to change much from Worlds, but there are some cards coming out that might be intriguing for the deck as well. Mostly I'm looking at the Zoroark and Lunatone package. I'm going to talk about these cards a lot throughout the video because I do think they're splashable, and I do think they offer a lot combined, especially with that Fighting Gong. You really don't need to play that many basic fighting energy in your deck to still have really reliable means of getting early Zoroark attacks or early Lunatone draw power, knowing that with Fighting Gong and Night Stretcher as a huge chunk of cards, you naturally have high consistency of getting the early Zoroark Lunatone on the board, and also high consistency of seeing extra cards from the Lunar Cycle or just offering single prize attacking threats. And I think that's the big thing for Gholdengo. In fact, at the World Championships, we saw Ultra Ball coming into Gholdengo lists so that they could search out their Strike It Rich Gholdengo without putting a Genesect EX into play. Additionally, we saw obviously the Sizzle coming into the list as a 1-1 package in a number of lists, and even there are a number of builds playing Fan Rotom without any other colourless Pokemon in the deck. They simply had it in their list so that they could swing for 70 with Assault Landing, and that's exactly what Zoroark can do here, in that you can tee off a prize race with a completely single prize board with just Gimme Ghoul, just Zoroark, just Lunatone, and, you know, Zoroark kicks us off. You take the 1, you force your opponent to take the 1, and then suddenly you can like go into your 2 prizes or whatever else. Or you can do the 1-1 into a 2-2, which Gholdengo is typically like quite poor at. Normally it has to commit its first 2 prizes to the board to start taking knockouts with Make It Rain, and there are situations where that's just like really bad. So having the Zoroark Lunatone package could be pretty interesting, even if literally you only play like the 3 metal, the 3 fighting, and still the ESP package. I think with Gongs, Nest Balls, and Stretchers, that can still work out. You still get that draw power off Lunatone that works nicely with Gholdengo, because of course you're just building a big hand size all in one go. But mostly it's about the Zoroark attacking presence here, which I think is interesting, because there were a number of builds at the World Championships that were trying to make that happen, trying to have a single prize angle, and it never really was that synergistic. So I do think that the Zoroark Lunatone package is worth exploring, although if I'm going to be a betting man, I would say that just the builds that we've seen at Worlds are inherently still so powerful, and I think just because Megas enter the game, Gholdengo like positions itself even more nicely by having 3 prize swing turns. Also, there's the Iron Defender. Like, I know we've seen Rigid Band in some Gholdengo lists. An Iron Defender is an item rather than a tool, but it can deal a reduction to all of your metal Pokemon for a turn. It's obviously just a turn, so it's a bit more specific than a Rigid Band, and one of the big payoffs of Rigid Band is that it's a free Arven search, whereas this is an item card, and that then competes with the Superior or something else along those lines. So I think generally this is going to be quite a weak item card, but I did just want to mention that this could be a way for Gholdengo to try and offset some numbers in certain instances, and we know there's a number of decks that are trying to be cute, two-shotty, set-up KO decks. So just like we've seen Picnic Basket and that other stuff, the Iron Defender can be a more proactive option to try and reduce damage coming in rather than healing damage after you've received it. So just a small note there. On to Dragapult then, and this is a big beneficiary of the Lily's Determination supporter card. This card's crazy, by the way. Shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 6. However, if you still have 6 prize cards remaining, you draw 8 instead. And we know that Dragapult is very good at doing a couple of things. Firstly, sitting back behind Budgie and building a board is one thing that it can do very well, but also using your own Dusclops and Dustoir to Curse Blast then shuts down your opponent's use of Lily for the full 8 cards as well. So you can be the one forcing your opponent to take prizes, making their Lilies worst, while yours stay really, really powerful for, probably 2 or 3 turns whilst you build towards your countercatcher combo. And seeing 8 is just far superior to the 7 dig that you'd have to do with research, especially when there's awkward discards at times. Even if you build your deck to have those multiple stretches to recover the Pokemon that you're bidding off, still I think the Shuffle 8 is a superior choice, to be honest with you. And I think that's very, very intriguing. There's also the Dangerous Ruins Stadium card. I think this is only interesting if Dragapult wants to play like 3 or 4 stadiums total, but I think the Jamming Tower generally is still going to be better. But what this can do is put some prep damage onto your own Pokemon for Monkey Dory shenanigans, which I think could be interesting if you're playing a straight Pult rather than a Dustoir build. So then your Monkey Dory is immediately, turning up and doing some damage, similar to like a Hawlucha style play. But at the same time, if you see the Dangerous Ruins quickly, you are then threatening your opponent to bounce this stadium card before they put any basics down. So sometimes you have this cheese option of like going first, jamming a Ruins, and then suddenly they're terrified of putting down any basics because they just don't have the right stadium in hand just yet to bounce it. I think this is only really likely to be in the straight build, but I don't think it's that relevant. I think it's mostly the Lily, which is a big deal. Then there are a couple threats coming out for Dragapult. First of all, these Megas are really big and really chunky, and a lot of the time Dragapult's good at picking apart a board by like bundling into a big stage 2 with a Dustoir plus a Dragapult attack all in one turn, or taking out like basics at the same time as engine Pokemon. And really the Curse Blast math lines up for 330, right, with the Phantom Dive 200 and the Dustoir 13 counters, but Megas are more than that, so you normally need to do all of this shenanigans with an additional Dusclops, or with Monkey Dory chipping in, or with Hawlucha chipping in, or whatever else it is. It's just more steps and more hoops for Dragapult to jump through to actually make the math line up cleanly. Now, don't get me wrong, because you're knocking out Megas, the reward is still very high, and it really helps your prize map, but there will be certain Megas that just sit on the board, and Dragapult can't deal with them, even with a Curse Blast in the list as well. And that's pretty scary, to be honest with you, because these decks are very good at wiping out damage as well, especially with the Waller's Compassion in some of the mega decks that build around tanking. That's going to be a huge issue for you. And there's also the issue that Mega Gardevoir basically just shakes your hand, even more so than like a Bravery Charmed Clefairy ever would, because at least you had counterplay with Tool Jammer and a response attack. Now, the 360 of Gardevoir, you're just not getting through that. That's just wiping 4 prizes off the board immediately, and that's just horrible for the deck. So your Gardevoir matchup already was poor, but if Mega Guardy's coming a thing, it's becoming even worse, I think, unless you're going to play a Dragazard build to try and offset that. And the final note is the Damp Psyduck, which will be a promotional card that isn't in Mega Evolution but comes out and will be legal during that time. And this can stop Curse Blast from activating, right? It stops your opponent from using these Pokemon that knock themselves out. And Psyduck's just a vulnerable 70 hit point basic, so it's not the be-all and end-all for Dragapult. Your opponent is committing a board space, and it's a Pokemon that can be KO'd easily with Monkey plus Phantom Dive or Hawlucha plus Phantom Dive, so it's not like they can just search it early on and say, haha, your ghosts are pointless throughout the remainder of the game, But what it does do is stop the rug pull early of like, I've Budooed, it's time for me to counter catch, blow up. Well, yeah, Curse Blast first, then counter catch, then take out all your guys before you evolve up. The early Psyduck means you can't have that explosive I win before they set up approach. Of course, they have to find the Psyduck first, and that's under item lock, so it's not always that easy, but they could poff in it before you Itchy Pollen. And there's that second option of like, as you set up your late game or sort of mid game Curse Blast, your like reload approach, where you're either trying to get your own Blood Moon in the mix, or you have to go through one big target, and Dragapult plus Dusknoir is the only way you can do that. And if they just search out a Psyduck mid game, you're like, that has foiled my plan. I have to try and find a backup avenue here, which might make you use your Phantom Dives differently, or this, that, and the other. So I do think there will be some issues with the Psyduck, but it's not guaranteed in a ton of decks in the first place. And secondly, it's all about timing. There's going to be situations where you laugh at the idea of a Psyduck coming down, you welcome it, you can actually use it to sit and rot on their bench until you're happy to take that out with your Phantom Dive later, knowing that you don't necessarily need Curse Blast, or you can time it appropriately anyway. So I think it's like a skill testing card on both parts of like when the Dragapult acknowledges that it's a problem and when they can allow it to stick on the board versus your opponent who has to plan when it's the best time to sort of protect their bench appropriately, knowing that the Psyduck can be an easy throwaway of prize cards as well. So that's actually one of the more intricate, like hard tech cards that we've seen for a while, the Psyduck. And because of that, I don't think it's mandatorily going into a ton of decks. And also, I think the meta is naturally quite wide right now, and that there could easily be like 6 or so decks that could take up 10% of the meta going into Mega Evolution, which makes me think it's a tough ask to put Psyduck into decks, although it could be the new shiny toy syndrome that you have to keep an eye out for, and people ultimately could be just frustrated with Dusknoir on the whole, because it's quite a toxic card. So that's a wait and see right now, but I do think there's a lot of discussion around the Psyduck and how that will be impacting Dragapult. I think by no means it's like, haha, this is like a Drapion or a Spiritomb or any of those Mew VMAX hard techs, where it's like, if your opponent can be bothered to put it in immediately you lose. I think that's not the case with Psyduck. I think there's still plenty of play to be had for the Dragapult in that situation, but it does just create extra hurdles and challenges, which I think is pretty interesting, to be honest with you. Heading into Raging Bolt, much like the Gholdengo, just being a one-hit KO deck in a world of Mega Evolution is fantastic. We know that Bolt boasts that ridiculous damage output, and it should have no trouble reaching into all of these Mega Pokemon, which is excellent. It does also gain a couple interesting cards. Now, I have already tried this in Tabletop, an Owlless build of Raging Bolt with the Gong plus Lunarock combination within the deck, giving an Owlless build a single prize attacker for a 1 attachment in the Solrock. This means that you don't have to be using Crispin and Sada necessarily. It could give you the avenue to play some Judge for early disruption plus single prize KO with a single prize Pokemon, which can really help out into the Stage 2 matchups. And of course, Lunacycle is another way for you to continue to draw cards alongside Raging Bolt at the same time. It's a great way to discard your fighting energy, which activates your Sada earlier on in the game. How often have we seen this lean towards Crispin because it's too many hoops for you to jump through to like have fighting, then Vessel it, then like Ultra Ball it and all this other stuff just to get a Sada off turn 1. Well, now you still need some Ball Search to get Lunatone and Solrock down, but it should be an easy way for you to filter fighting energy throughout the game and get draw power as you go, which I do think is pretty appealing. Now, my initial reaction after testing an Owlless build is that I think Noctowl is still the best way to play Bolt going forward, but maybe that's just how I've built the list of Lunarock, or maybe it's just the matchups that I played into. There's still plenty more testing to go, and I do think this is an appealing combination, especially because we have seen success from straight Bolt in the past. Obviously, with Radiant Greninja, is much more flexible and easy, but there are echoes here for a Turbo Bolt to make a resurgence. Also, quick note to Mega Kangaskhan, it could be a Pokemon that you just have within the deck to give yourself some Iona proofing, and of course there is at the very least Crispin in the deck, so you can still try and build toward a rapid fire combo, and it's a big chunky guy that draws cards, so it's not the worst thing to include as a one-off. Maybe it's slightly worse than Mew EX, but I think the two are relatively comparable when you're trying to safeguard yourself against hand disruption. There are a couple threats coming in here, and I do think the Venusaur deck is going to be like a threat to a number of these archetypes, actually. And I think this is like a Feraligatr style deck where it's like a boogeyman in the room, basically making us have enough switch cards in the game, similar to how we've seen Maractus in Straight Bolt and in Grimmsnarl. I think if Venusaur becomes a deck, and that is a big if, I don't think it's guaranteed,
the fact that it's most likely going to be like a lot of Crustals in there, and having 3 or 4 of the Bulbasaur with Bind Down to have trapping counter-catcher plays, I just think that it means that Raging Bolt has to be on high alert, having not just its not just its prime catcher, but also having Turo, maybe also having Iron Leaves as well, making sure it has enough pivots so that it can get around a Bulbasaur, and making sure that it has enough single prizes to get through potentially a couple Crustal as well. So I think the awareness of Venusaur is something that Bolt has to be doing going into the Mega Evolution format. Also, Mega Manectric, you'd think this would be like a really good one on paper, but there is the backdoor win condition of Flash Ray, just preventing all damage done to this Pokemon by your opponent's basics. And there could be a build of Mega Manectric that uses Magneton, so it can actually surprise you in that it can become a lone Manectric board state pretty quickly. And as soon as it creates that lone Manectric board states, it does just win off Flash Ray. So maybe it's a reason to have Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon in Raging Bolt, for example, as an option, so you can still demolish through or something like that, make them have a decision to make. Also, Demolish would be really good into Venusaur as well to help with the Crustals. So yeah, a few things to think about there for Raging Bolt. But generally, you enjoy seeing Megas in the format, and it's cool to see that, again, there's a contestant that can go up against an Owl build of Bolt now with this Lunar Rock single prize package. On to Gardevoir then. This deck actually gains quite a lot from Mega Evolution. We have upgrades in our evolving basics. Ralts has the Collect attack that can just draw a card that can help in a pinch, and Curlier has the Call Sign attack that can search for 3 Pokemon, which can also help out in a pinch. But at the same time, we gain the Lily's Determination supporter, which is great for a setup deck like this, especially because we love to pass with TM Evolution or TM Turbo Energize as our early opening attacks, possibly even Mind Bend defensively. All of these things don't take prize cards, which means Lily is live for you for a number of turns, giving you that big draw 8, which is great for candy combos, great for getting Monkey Dory Dark combos rolling, and just generally getting you into the game is a great thing. And at the same time, we get a great new Stadium card in Mystery Garden. You can discard an energy from hand to draw until they have as many cards as they do Psychic Pokemon in play. Completely built for Gardevoir. And in fact, I think it might push us back towards some Poffins coming into the deck. I think Poffin naturally helps if you're trying to put the Mega in your deck anyway, because you need access to more Ralts earlier on in the game to build not just Gardevoir EX, but have a backup Curlier and maybe another backup evolution line so that you can evolve into the Mega at will, knowing that even if the Gardevoir EX is KO'd, you can make another EX while still having the Mega developed, that sort of thing. So naturally, I think Poffins go back into Gardevoir if you want to build around the Mega, but also Poffin helps Mystery Garden because you get additional Ralts down and then you're drawing more cards off the Stadium card. And the fact that this is a Stadium is excellent because we can search it from Secret Box. I've no doubt that Artisan will still be important in the deck, and I think it's at least a one-of the Artisan still, but Mystery Garden is like a very good one-of, if not a new two-of in the deck, giving you more Psychic Energy discard whilst getting you some extra draw in the opening, which is so good for a setup deck to see. If you really want to go crazy, you could try Precious Trolley and trolley out a bunch of Psychic Mons and then have like 3 or 4 Garden in your deck and really just keep tapping this as your draw engine as you go. Giving Gardevoir back a draw engine and a means of discarding Psychic sounds terrifying. Not something I've built just yet, a trolley build, but the potential is there to really lean into that A-spec and just say, that's going to get me a ton of monkeys, a ton of Ralts, and now the Garden is completely crazy for me for the rest of the game, which is a pretty exciting option, to be honest with you. Now, the Mega's an interesting discussion. Myself and Jack were testing this weekend, and honestly, the Mega impressed me a lot. We gave it a fairly, middle rating in our set review, but it does just become a checkmate card into a number of matchups that can't deal the 360, which obviously there are going to be a handful of those. And even if it is just this big beta, you can still scale the damage so that Symphonia isn't taking a knockout, so you can still play around Pheasantipity and still use Monkey Dory to wipe a board. So I do think its flexibility is there, and I do think changing the build to more Poffin-based and more Garden-based, obviously having a minimum of 2 Candy now, and a minimum of 2 Curlier, I think it's actually pretty reasonable to get this Mega online in enough games where it's very, very powerful, and I think is generally a bigger benefit than Drifloon Bravery Charm. That said, it's still not guaranteed to be in the deck. I still want to make that clear that even though it feels like a win more card, it has impressed me in the deck, if that makes sense. But we know that Gardevoir can still completely function by just yoinking the new consistency cards for itself and saying, I'm a better deck inherently, I can still play the one prize game, I still have the EX, which is still generally fairly tanky. And I think what's relevant is that it has that fighting resistance, which is going to become more and more important, by the way, with potentially Lucario, but also potentially Garchomp coming out, that Mega Gardevoir EX is still a very decent tank in the meta, which is definitely interesting. So yeah, the Mega, I'm more on the fence about than I was initially. At first I thought I'm not going to be making the space for it in my Guardy deck, But now I've seen enough play with it that I'm like, yeah, maybe it is just good enough. I'm definitely more scratching my head than I was previously and more open to the idea of it being in lists. Again, quick note to Bulbasaur and just like bind down can beat you. They can bind down Monkey Dory pretty easily, and yes, you can like try and Monkey Dory damage back to them and whatnot, but they can easily use like Shuckles and whatnot to keep Monkey Dories trapped and do all this other stuff. So just be aware that Gardevoir doesn't play many natural switching cards, and that opens the door for a trapping deck to try and have its way with you. So just a small threat there. But generally, I think Gardevoir is still sitting pretty and gains consistency, which is terrifying because this was already winning a ton of tournaments in the previous like 2 or 3 formats. So the fact that it's a big winner from this expansion is pretty scary, to be honest. Onto Grimmsnarl then, and the fact that this is an engine-less deck means that Lily is a massive upgrade. We love seeing 8 cards. Research was a hard card to play, really, in the deck. Was a little bit awkward sometimes and made you play odd counts of cards just to allow you to have that discard. Whereas now Lily's just like the perfect card to come in, knowing that you sit behind Budew while you build your Frostlass and Monkeys up, knowing that you can, really just take your prizes as and when you want to of Grimmsnarl is very appealing. Also, because Grimmsnarl is a secret box deck, you could easily add in the Dangerous Ruins. This allows your Monkey Dory to be threatening more early on in the game. As soon as you bench them, they're taking damage, similar to how a Frostlass likes to rack them up with counters. Now you could use that Ruins to put things in range of your snipe attack on your opponent's side of the board, but also damaging your own monkeys immediately triggers them to be more dangerous threats, which is pretty cool. There's Yveltal with a natural free retreat, which might be an upgrade to Maractus. I still think there could be reasons to like the Maractus, but I do think Yveltal is a new inclusion that I think is very reasonable. And there's also Mega Absol. Now, I don't think it's guaranteed to go into Grimmsnarl by any means, but it does give you a reason to think more about E-Switch, which is already good in the deck because it allows you to use more Monkey Dory on a certain turn to get surprise damage on the board that your opponent may not expect. But also the fact that it can now grab you an Absol out of nowhere is also pretty appealing because we have so much flexible damage placement that Doom Period could take out a key threat. I think that's something that you shouldn't really write off. Now, there are a couple threats, like I was saying with Dragapult. Chunky Megas is worrying when you're a 2-shot deck predominantly. Like, yes, a lot of these Megas are evolving Pokemon that you can still try and Devo, but a lot of them are big basics and can be wallied as well, which I think is a concern. There are some grass types coming out, which is, something that Grimmsnarl doesn't naturally want to see too much. But also just seeing Garchomp and Lucario have such easy reach to hit that 320, it's also quite a concern that just Premium Power Pro coming out in the format means that more things KO the Grimmsnarl. And we know that Grimmsnarl performs best when it's forcing the opponent to punch into it and suddenly you have crazy amounts of monkey damage alongside the Shadow Bullet. So I do think it inherently is more consistent, which is a big buff for the deck. That's one of my main things holding it back right now. And the Dangerous Ruins makes you more aggressive as well because, as we know, sometimes Frostlass can just be targeted and suddenly you just don't have monkey math. Now you have Dangerous Ruins to keep brute forcing that throughout the game, which I think is cool. But Megas come at an awkward time for this deck as well, meaning that you're going to be one-shot a lot more and you have to accommodate for that. Onto Charizard, just another deck that loves to see that Lily's Determination coming into the format again, giving yourself more reliability from your use of Supporter. Seeing Candy plus Stage 2 is excellent. And there's also a couple other options in here. The Psyduck can give you some much-needed protection against Dustoir. I feel like so frequently players are able to pick apart a Charizard board, and it's all thanks to that Dustoir. So now that you gain the Psyduck, that can give you some peace of mind into the Dragapult matchup. I think with Psyduck plus Mist Energy, it can start getting much closer once again. There's also the interesting supporter of Acerola's Mischief. I've gone back and forth on this card, really, but when you are playing the Pidgeot engine, in theory, you can try and time this correctly to be useful for you, where you can set up single prize board states with a Pidgeot that you can protect. I think it feels a little similar to a Turo, and Turo is a switching card, whereas Acerola is just a, let me not lose the game card. And Charizard already has the let me not lose the game card in terms of Briar, which actually says, oh, if you're at 2, I can now immediately win the game. So it's weird to try and think of having Acerola and Briar in one deck, especially when you could also be playing Turo at the same time to sculpt a board state that your opponent can't easily get around. But I do think it's an option. Just because Quick Search exists, I think it's something I thought was worth mentioning, and that you can create a situation where your opponent physically can't win the game, you can get a punch in, and then suddenly that punch is winning the game on the next turn, especially if you're protecting Quick Search itself, which then allows you to close the game even after hand disruption very frequently. The one other thing I would say is that for the new threats, again, Megas are an issue. If Charizard isn't using Burning Darkness in the late game to KO stuff, that's a big worry. Charizard was forcing itself into a late game where it couldn't miss knockouts, and now with Megas in the mix, it could still be shy on certain Pokemon for damage that it's looking for, which is somewhat of a concern. Also, just like the Grimmsnarl, the fact that Premium Power Pro comes out for Chomp and for Lucario means that there's easy means of KOing the Charizard, and just like Grimmsnarl, the strength of the deck is when it's able to take a hit and get multiple attacks off. And also, you know, this deck is also a Dusknoir build itself, even though it would love to put Psyduck in the list. It's also concerned that other people can tech the duck, and suddenly you can't be Dusk popping to push your own Burning Darkness into KO range of certain things, or take out Engine Pokemon while slamming the Iono. All of these things start getting shut down from the one use of your opponent's Psyduck as well. So the Charizard does gain a few cards here for consistency, which I like, and it can also protect itself against Dusknoir, but I do think that the fact that people can shut you down can be concerning, and just the amount of Megas in the format is the big question mark. If there's still not many and they're just making a small splash, I think Charizard's looking pretty strong, to be honest, but if we start seeing more and more of these big Megas, I think that's a worry for the deck. Flareon's an interesting deck coming into the new format because it doesn't really gain much. Like, sure, because you play Crispin, you could add in a Mega Kangaskhan, and yes, it gives you extra draw power and is a generally like decent utility attacker. But I think the big thing to note is that Flareon is mostly like a weakness toolbox. It's known for having Flareon, Leafeon, sometimes Sylveon, also Lily's Clefairy, sometimes Wellspring. Like, you just hit a whole host of weaknesses, and the fact that there are 3 prize Pokemon, and the easiest way to knock out these Pokemon is just by hitting for weakness, and the fact that Flareon naturally plays so many different basic energy within the deck means that you can easily already just reach these Megas without having to do any changes within your deck, especially if it's going to be the likes of Lucario or Venusaur making the biggest splash in terms of those Mega Evolutions, because you're already covering for those things, you already have easy means of knocking them out. So I do like to see that this Weakness Box deck can continue. It's, again, this question mark of like wait and see what decks are going to be most popular, but I think already having the baseline of I'm at least very decent into Dengo and Bolt, which are some of the aggro decks of the format that are very good into Megas, but then also having some key weaknesses that are already good in the format is another boast for Flareon as well. The one concern is that Gardevoir doesn't seem to be going anywhere, and that's still a tough matchup for this archetype, but generally I think Flareon's going to do pretty well just while the meta revolves around it, rather than adding any new cards to its own deck. Next up, we have Joltik Box. Now, what's interesting is that Pikachu was trying to be this sort of catch-all KO style Pokemon that, as long as you weren't hitting for weakness with Clefairy or Galvantula or whatever, Pikachu would mop up the rest of the field. And that's not so much the case if more Megas start coming out, right? The Mega Gardy, the Mega Venusaur, even Camerupt, these sorts of Pokemon that you can't hit for weakness in your Joltik Box deck now sit out of range and will laugh at you as they take 4 prize cards, essentially. Like, all of them should have an easy means of doing that, and the Pikachu isn't really a good response, which then means you don't have a good response into a ton of matchups. So I think, if anything, it's more likely that we're going to see more and more of the Gholdengo plus Iron Hands Joltik combo, the Cash in Hand deck, where you have, rather than Crispin for Pika, you have Gholdengo plus Superiors to try and close out games, because I think just having that additional reach is the premium choice right now. So I think Joltik Box is probably going to be fading into obscurity while we see more of the Gholdengo Joltik combination start to rise up more and more. The other thing I want to take a quick moment to talk about was the fact that Miraidon builds just more generally do gain some cool pieces. Magnemite now has 70 hit points, so you're a little bit less vulnerable into Monkey Dory decks and into Dragapult early on. It gives you more license to sit around on the board for Magnemite with your Magneton and then still have a means of getting into it on a future turn. And also there's a couple Megas which are somewhat interesting. Mega Kang, again, just because it can draw cards, can give you Iono Protection, and you're already playing Latias, right? So you can pivot between it pretty happily. Who knows, if you play Electric, you could even try and power this guy up. And then Mega Manectric, I'm not too high on this card, but it does hit 330 with Riot Blaster, which is looking pretty appealing. And Flash Ray can be a frustrating attack for a couple of matchups. So there's potential to have an early Miraidon Hands deck, and then rather than the Zekrom EX that we saw in Black Bolt White Flare, we go for a thin line of the Mega Man instead, and just say that no matter how many prizes your opponent's taken, you have a 330 damage option that can brute force you through some Stage 2 Pokemon. Onto Zoroark then. This definitely surprised at the World Championships and seemed to be a really smart metagame call. So how is it going to be shaping up in the new format? Well, Lily's Determination is a great supporter for extra consistency. We know this deck likes to sit back with its TMs, so we'll have a couple opportunities to draw the full 8, which is always handy. And as we know, we can trade these away as they diminish in value. We have a new corner trapping option that naturally attacks with Dark Energy, which is pretty nice and is a natural free retreat pivot. And then there's this question mark of like, Does Zoroark pivot from being the upfront Mon into being more of a supporting role? I think we've only seen it a couple times really with like Archaladon Zoroark and a few other things here and there trying to add it in. Obviously we saw the highlight of Gardevoir at one point in the previous format. But I think Lucario could be actually the best partner we've seen of the bunch. The idea being that Zoroark EX can cover the psychic weakness of Mega Lucario and be an attacking presence in its own right, but that Mega Lucario is just a dumb, good stats machine and needs something to help draw cards as it goes. Zoroark being a great option to filter out cards, including Fighting Energy to improve the Aura Drab synergy, but also draw you towards those premium power pros as you go, and make the most out of those Mega Braves for big KOs. Myself and Jack have already made a build of this, and I think it has bags of potential going forward. There's not a lot of natural synergy here, but what the type coverage provides, and just generally being a good draw coverage card, makes me think that it could be a great combination of two stage ones. It gives me vibes of old Zoro GX plus Lycanroc, where it's just a big beater going alongside the draw engine that can sometimes chip in with attacks and type coverage. As for threats generally, I think the fact that Zoroark is getting sneezed through and KO'd a lot more easily going forward is a concern, with more grass types coming in the metagame and more decks that can reach KOs via Premium Power Pro, whether it's Lucario or Chomp or whatever else. There are more things that will now just push through the Zoro, and as the format becomes more towards Megas, there's more need to have one-hit KO decks in the format, which is not what Zoroark naturally wants to see. We saw the best performing Zoros at Worlds all had to hard tech for Dengo, but if there's more Gholdengo that are also aware of their techs, and there's going to be more Raging Bolt in the format, that's not necessarily something you want to see as Zoroark. So for my money, I think Zoro is now going to become a supporting role for Mega Lucario EX, and I'm really excited to see how that one turns out. Next up we have Blissey. Now this is sort of on the lower end of playability right now, but it is a deck that gains a lot actually, because gaining Megas is exactly what this deck wants to see. Big, spongy, tanky Pokemon that can have a variety of weaknesses, and you can Bravery Charm them up. Just synergizes so nicely with the switching of the energy cards, plus the Monkey Dory shenanigans, or potential to use the Wally's Compassion supporter alongside your Megas, completely wiping away damage that your opponent's dealt to you. At the same time, Kangaskhan seems to be a really good partner here because it naturally provides draw power to a deck that doesn't really draw cards outside of the return attack from the Blissey itself. Once again, this deck leans into the Arven Technical Machine package, so having slow turns in the opening allows Lily's Determination to be a great option. And seeing 8 cards is never a bad thing. So as you slowly set up, build your board, you can have this great supporter at your side. The big concerns for me, similar to what I was just saying with Zoroark, as like this spongy deck that's trying to absorb these hits, there's more and more reason to like one-hit KO when there's a world of Megas around, so that people can just push through them and take 3 prize cards. That might make it difficult for Blissey to try and attempt to be this tank in a world where one-hit KO is more premium, and there are more decks that can have that reach because of Premium Power Pro once again. And of course, these are fighting types that can KO Blissey very easily, and the Kangaskhan as well. And just generally, Mega Gardevoir is another one-hit KO option. Like, I think there's a lot of things that can push through the Blissey, which is a concern. So just as it has been over the last few formats, I think it's one that you have to time the meta correctly to make the most out of this deck, even with it inherently gaining a lot. Ceruledge is looking pretty tasty also in the new format. It could get this new single prize attacking package, where we've often seen Revavroom be the backup to Ceruledge. Now we could have it in basic form from Lunatone Solrock. The big upswing is that Solrock now can provide some single prize attacking pressure early on, while you build towards the Ceruledge higher damage output. Also, the fact that the Lunar Cycle happens to be Fighting Energy is also pretty strong, because we have a Drillbur in format that can dig up a bunch of Fighting Energy from the deck and start discarding them very quickly. It might even mean that you don't have to play the Blender as your A-Spec, you can just rely on Drillbur to discard a bunch of Fighting Energy early, ramping your damage output with Ceruledge, and then you can dedicate your A-Spec to other choices, like Secret Box for consistency, Prime Catcher, or Legacy Energy for power. These sorts of things are pretty appealing for Ceruledge when it doesn't have to play the Blender. The one issue for Ceruledge is that with Megas now coming out, you have even higher damage output that you have to reach, which might require even more energy investment. We might be getting into the 20s or the 21 energy counts, rather than the sort of 18, 19 that we've seen Ceruledge sit on, which means, you know, just those 1 or 2 fewer consistency cards then makes your deck a little bit clunky, a little bit worse, just so that you have that reach into the Megas when you face them. For Tera Box, I think just like with the Joltik Box discussion, the Pikachu EX isn't that catch-all play anymore, But with Crispin, there are some Megas that we possibly could start looking towards. I think Mega Kang, again, always a good option because it just has generic decent damage and high hit points. And also the Mawile could be okay. If you're using Metal Energy anyway in the deck and still have Pikachu, if you have multiple Metal, you can still Crispin attach or E-Switch attach and get Mawile as a Greedy Devour KO play after you've taken a few. And Tera Box is very good at taking the early, like, 3 or 4 prizes. With Wellspring and with your type coverage attackers, it shouldn't be too difficult for Mawile to be a big closer in your list. At that point, though, weaving in Megas has its downsides. Of course, these Pokemon can't really sit on the board too easily, and will try and warp the deck in a different direction. I think right now, Flareon looks to be the better of the two sort of toolboxes, but I do think the Megas could give it an interesting edge. The toolbox I'm actually more invested in is Ho-Oh Armarouge, which I think can gain access to all sorts of Megas because you have those Prism Energy at your disposal, and you have Legacy Energy, which is also really good on Megas. Turning these into 2 prizes is obviously insane. Simply the fact that this deck gains more options and more utility, whilst also gaining a new supporter card in Lily, means that you draw more cards with Mega Kang and Lily, and you have more payoffs with even spongier Pokemon that can be a great source that can hold your energy attachments. Genuinely, I think we're getting to a critical mass of basic Pokemon that makes this deck worthwhile, worth the headache and worth the struggle of its inconsistency, because we just have so much going for it in terms of attacking threat. On to Typhlosion. If you can't tell by now, I am a believer in the Lunarock engine. Myself and Jack have already played a build of Typhlosion with this package, and let me tell you, it feels really good to go back to being a pure single prize build, possibly one Fez coming into the deck, but generally giving your opponent a difficult prize map and as many turns as possible to swing with Typhlosion is really, really appealing. Speaking of which, we gained Psyduck, and one of the worst matchups for Typhlosion was Dragapult Dusknoir, so a nice tech card there where we naturally have space within the list in terms of bench space is really nice to try and cover up what is otherwise a really poor matchup. But it's really awesome to have these other basic Pokemon within the deck that can just sponge and, you know, give up those early prizes whilst you're protecting your Cyndaquils and Quilavas and building towards your Typhlosions. Even if you're not taking prizes on these guys and just using TM Evolution off them, just the fact you're protecting Cyndaquil is so vital for the deck, because the big puzzle of Typhlosion is just keeping enough around to the point where they're just swinging and taking names, and having this early game package that can A, take prizes into other setup style decks with Zoroark, but B, also just, you know, when you're against the aggressive decks, be those front men that can just sit there and give up the prizes while you build your stage 2 in the back, which is really appealing. The one thing that is a downside is that, once again, we've just gained the Bangle, so Typhlosion's just got in the position where it can KO basically anything. And now with Megas coming out, it pushes itself back out of range, which is a shame, because now there's going to be things that can sponge a Typhlosion punch, and that's a problem, because then you're falling prey to their healing shenanigans and all this other stuff. So it's not necessarily the bomb that it has been over the last few months with Black Bolt White Flare, but I do think it has an appealing engine. Again, just anecdotally, we've had the sort of 2-2 Zoroark Lunatone package, 4 Gong, 4 Stretcher, and only 4 Fighting Energy, and that's felt really good to give you extra Lunar Cycle draw and Zoroark pressure. Like, I think it doesn't need to be that much investment to make this package of cards really, really worthwhile. And of course, Lily's Determination, again, good supporter. Naturally, you're going to play for Arven for Ethan before anything else, and then from there, it's like some Lily, some boss, some Iono, some boss, but Lily is something that I always want to mention because it's always a card that you could be considering within your decks. And then you may notice that Garchomp was actually sitting currently outside our top 20, although it did have some highlight reel placements at the NEIC. I have been mentioning it frequently whenever I've mentioned Premium Power Pro, because I think Garchomp could be the biggest winner of all coming into this expansion, and with these includes could be pole vaulting up the tier list. The combination of Roserade and Premium Power Pro makes Garchomp an absolute beatstick. Even the Corkscrew Dive, which is just a base 100, with enough Roserade and Premium Powers, you could be taking knockouts on basic EX Pokemon. And obviously its second attack, while you discard those energy, Premium Power Pro should have no problem bursting through those stage 2 Pokemon and even Megas if you save up enough Premium Power Pros. At the same time, you gain Lily, which is awesome. You gain Vitality Forest, which is nice. If you're playing Secret Box, which I am in my Garchomp, even just playing one copy of this to allow you to not need to pop in Roselias early, you can just go full Gibble. And then if you use Vitality Forest, you can use your turn 2 Gabites to immediately get Roserade Roselia and Roserade and immediately evolve into them, it means that you get basically burst damage that your opponent necessarily wasn't playing around, whilst getting your optimal setup, even with less poffins, because previous Garchomp was very setup reliant and could really fizzle if it didn't have optimal starts, because you need those Roselias for maximum damage output a lot of the time to make your math work. Whereas now the Forest means that you can delay those Roselia, knowing that they can still become Roserade all in one turn thanks to your multiple Gabite procs. Psyduck's a nice include as well. One of the easiest ways through Chomp was having to Dusk through them, definitely for playing the Dragapult builds or Charizard. Fighting Gong is naturally excellent, just because it can get you Gibble or Energy, and it means you can skimp out on spaces. And again, I'm going to be blowing the trumpet of Lunar Rock. I actually think it's not that great in this list. I think generally TM Evolution might still be the preferred method for this deck. But again, just the fact that this could even be a 1-1 package in your list is okay. It does eat into your bench spaces, but again, giving Solrock this early pressure approach is something you can't really ignore. The one thing I would say is that Gabite and Gibble are actually decent at taking prizes now, just because of Premium Power Pro and with Forest that can get you earlier Roserades. So I don't think it's mandatory that you have this package, but hey, they're fighting types, you naturally play fighting energy in the deck, and you have Gongs, so it wouldn't be the worst thing to see in the list. As for threats from Garchomp, there are some grass attacking decks coming out in the format. Venusaur could be an issue. But genuinely, I think Chomp is going to make like a big splash as soon as Mega Evolution drops. I think there's more to figure out with Lucario, a more delicate balance to strike, whereas Garchomp, we already know like what a decent baseline is, and we just have to make space for the premium powers to make it worthwhile. And from mine and Jack's testing, this has been one of the best performers so far, so I really think Garchomp is making a big statement and joining in the Mega Evolution format. That's it then for the big impact headlines for the Mega Evolution expansion. What new cards are you trying to brute force into your favourite builds? What new archetypes from Mega Evolution are you concerned to come up against with your favourite archetype? And let me know what your favourite card is from Mega Evolution. If you want to remind yourselves of any of the cards we discussed today, myself and Jack have got a full set review of the most interesting cards of Mega Evolution, so definitely check that out to refresh your memories. But for now, hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you tomorrow for another one, where we get into some tabletop action. Cheers.